Imagine a medieval banquet hall shimmering with torchlight and tapestry, where nobles in finest silks dine on venison and spiced wine. In this scene, King Edmund IV of Wessex, a hypothetical composite inspired by chronicled cases, raises his goblet for a toast to peace with the neighboring dukedom of Mercia. Yet within hours he collapses in agony, clutching his stomach, his face contorted in primal fear. His physicians gather, peering into his urine, prodding his limbs, and bleeding him with leeches. But nothing halts the onslaught of pain. Each gasp churns into a scream that echoes through the stone corridors. For 7 harrowing days, King Edmund will endure spasms so violent that even seasoned knights weep at their clangor, until at last his throne grows empty and his reign fades into legend. Such prolonged, screaming deaths were not merely fiction. Medieval and early Renaissance sources recount sovereigns succumbing to slow-acting toxins or diseases that inflicted excruciating suffering over days. At the heart of these torments stood poisons like arsenic trioxide inheritance powder to its victims' hemlock, or ergot-laden rye. Meanwhile, diseases such as ergotism and ulcerative dysentery could mimic poisoning so convincingly that even learned physicians hesitated to pronounce cause of death. In royal courts, medicine and murder often shared the same instruments, a sweetened draught to disprove the boundary between cure and conspiracy. Arsenic, the deadliest of the medieval white poisons, was prized for being colorless, odorless, and nearly tasteless. Extracted from orpiment or realgar, it could be mixed into broths, honey, or wine without detection. Contemporary toxicology manuals like the 14th century Liber de Alchemia warn of its delayed onset. Victims might feel fine for a dozen hours, then experience vomiting, abdominal cruelties, and violent convulsions. Dehydration and organ failure would follow in a slow crescendo of screams. Because arsenic symptoms overlapped with cholera or dysentery, common scourges and medieval towns poisoners could hide their crime amidst epidemic chaos. Hemlock, by contrast, induced paralysis through neurotoxic alkaloids. Victims retained their senses while limbs stiffened, culminating in asphyxiation as respiratory muscles failed. Accounts sometimes speak of a king's final week as a descent from frenzied agony to the quiet terror of conscious suffocation. In one documented case, the death of Duke William, II of Guelders in 1377 chroniclers debated whether the Duke's trembling and silent groans were the result of hemlock poisoning or a catastrophic stroke. Ultimately, his physician's treatments, purges, emetics, and repeated bloodletting likely exacerbated his condition, prolonging both life and suffering. Beyond deliberate poisonings, ergotism poisoning from the fungus Claviceps purpurea infecting rye could decimate populations. During the infamous Dancing Plague of Strasbourg in 1518, victims of ergotism danced in spasms for weeks. But in isolated castle sieges, ergot-tainted bread inflicted equally dreadful fates. Imagine King Matthias of Bohemia under siege, consuming scrawny grain rationed from his own fields. Within days he would writhe in cramps, hallucinate visions of fire, and beg for water as his flesh numbed and blistered. Chroniclers record that prisoners joked about the king soiling himself, yet caretakers afraid to be accused of foul play dared not intervene, letting nature's poison wring out a monarch's final breath. Yet who stood to benefit from a royal death by poison? Dynastic ambition and foreign intrigue both played cruel roles. A younger brother eager for the throne might bribe a court apothecary, slipping arsenic into nightly possets. A rival baron could hire mercenaries to lace a falconer's mead with hemlock, knowing the king favored the falcon's bottom draw. Even queens faced suspicion. Widowed in 7 days, a queen regent might be accused of administering the inheritance powder to secure power or protect her son's claim. These whispered accusations fueled rumors that kept courtiers awake, watching every cup, every loaf of rye. Historical example: King Conan IV of Brittany, recorded in monastic annals, died in 1171 after a week of screams. Though plague swept the duchy, local monks insisted that only Conan's vaulted chamber sealed against the cold received special bread from the castle baker. Whether by disease or deception, his death sparked a wave of trials for the Bakers' Guild, illustrating how medical ambiguity clouded justice. medicine itself could unwittingly prolong suffering. The Salernitan practitioners taught that removing evil humors via bloodletting and purgatives could cure any poison. In fact, bleeding a poisoned victim simply reduced blood volume, hastening collapse but extending agony by delaying irreversible organ shutdown. Similarly, the use of Theriaca complex antidote derived from up to 60 ingredients could induce delirium, intensify sweating, or trigger allergic reactions, making a patient's screams multiply across the castle walls. As the seventh day dawned, King Edmund's body would be unrecognizable, gaunt, parched, and scarred by punctures from leeches. His final cry would mingle defiance with despair, a reminder that even a crown could not decree immunity from medieval medicine-esque cruelties. In the spring of 1194, the Mediterranean breeze carried both the scent of orange blossom and unspoken dread through Palermo's palace corridors. King Richard II of Sicily, nicknamed the Lion of the Two Seas for his naval triumphs, fell grievously ill shortly after his marriage to Margaret of Navarre. Chroniclers differ on whether he tasted treason or disease first, but all agree on one terrifying fact: Richard died screaming for nearly a week, his royal dignity replaced by mortal agony. According to Peter of Ibelli's Liber et Honorum Augusti, Richard's illness began with a mild fever after a lavish feast. A favored dish pigeon stew simmered in walnut oil was later blamed for the calamity. On day 1 he complained of nausea. By sundown he retched violently in the royal latrine. On day 2 the king's courtiers observed his legs turning mottled blackish in the calf as though drowning in shadow. The court physicians bled him thrice, invoking Galenic theory to balance his humors, but the blood ran dark and frothy. They applied poultices of crushed lily and rose petals, believing floral essences could draw out poison. Instead, the ointments fostered festering blisters. Modern toxicologists speculate that Richard's symptoms align with acute ergotism, not arsenic. Sicily's spring harvest was often plagued by ergot-infected rye, especially during wet seasons. A dish thickened with rye flour, perhaps the dumplings Richard favored, could have introduced the hallucinogenic alkaloids. Ergotism causes vasoconstriction leading to gangrene alongside convulsive seizures. Survivors reported hearing buzzing insects beneath their skin and seeing visions of dancing demons. For a king, these symptoms would have been confessed as evidence of demonic attack, fueling both medical and ecclesiastical interventions. Religious authorities drafted exorcism rites alongside medical treatments. Priests sprinkled holy water and incanted prayers to Saint Anthony the Great, the patron saint against ergotism, while physicians administered theriac, an antidote containing viper flesh and opium poppy. The mixture relieved spasms briefly, only to plunge the king into deeper delirium. On day 4, Richard's screams were so fierce that the palace walls trembled. Neighboring townsfolk believed the city was under siege. Ships in the harbor cut sail in alarm, fearing an enemy attack timed to the king's suffering. Yet intrigue shadowed every remedy. Margaret of Navarre's retinue remained suspicious when her own shares of wine and bread were served sealed in Navarre's vessels. Rumors swirled that Margaret feared deposition in favor of a pro-Hohenstaufen faction at court. A terse letter from Emperor Henry VI, a distant cousin, arrived in Sicily, ostensibly expressing concern. Some historians theorize that Sicilian barons paid Henry's envoys to slip arsenic into the jester's jugs, counting on Margaret's hostility to distract attention. While no primary source confirms assassination, the timing of Henry's letter and Richard's swift demise suggests deliberate poisoning could have worsened an already dire ergotism case. On day 5, Richard's pulse slowed to a thread. His voice, once thunderous on the deck of a galley, was reduced to a rasping whisper. Chroniclers note that even in his delirium he murmured pleas to Saint Erasmus, patron against abdominal ailments. The queen knelt beside him, clutching his hand, while courtiers waited in silent dread, hoping for a merciful death rather than continued torment. Finally, on the morning of day 7, sunlight flooded Richard's chamber as he breathed his last. A final gust expelled from lungs ravaged by convulsions. His body, examined after death, displayed blackened extremities and a fissured tongue, classic signs of ergotism. However, no trace of ergot was found in his grain stores. Instead, his personal wine cellar revealed a solitary broken seal on one amphora. Court records mention a clandestine investigation, an unprecedented step for a royal death, but the findings were sealed by Margaret's command. Whether ergot or arsenic or both, claimed Richard, his protracted agony sparked seismic reactions across Christendom. In the aftermath, Sicilian courts banned rye bread during state functions and instituted inspections of grain. Wine barrels were branded with royal crests, and only trusted cupbearers could unseal them. These measures mirrored later European practices and laid the groundwork for early food safety regulations. Richard's tortured end also catalyzed early forensic inquiry. Salerno-trained doctors compiled his symptom log into a case study circulated to medical schools in Salerno, Montpellier, and Paris. Instructions for differentiating ergotism from poisoning, examining harvest records, testing food samples, and interviewing potential witnesses emerged from the confusion of his death. Thus, the Lion of the Two Seas became the unwitting pioneer of forensic toxicology. In November 1288, the chill winds rattled Buckingham Castle's Great Hall as Earl Robert of Chester prepared for a banquet in honor of King Edward I's progress through the Midlands. Robert, a warrior noble known for his wealth and loyalty, owed his rise to the favor of both Edward and Prince Llewellyn ap Griffith of Wales. This precarious alliance made him a target for those who saw an opportunity in his divided loyalties. On the eve of the feast, Robert received a personal invitation from Lady Eleanor, the king's cousin. She promised delicate tarts flavored with cherries from Kent, a rare luxury. Unbeknownst to him, Eleanor's cook had been bribed by Sir Philip de Monmouth, a rival who coveted Robert's lands. Into the cherry syrups was mixed a potent brew of hemlock and digitalis, creating both convulsions and cardiac distress. Within hours of the feast's start, Robert's face twisted in horror as his limbs froze in spasms. He dropped his goblet and collapsed onto the dais. The court physician, Master Hugh of Oxford, recognized the signs of poisoning: pinpoint pupils, biting of the tongue, and gradual paralysis. He ordered calomel poultices on Robert's calves to draw out toxins and administered a decoction of gentian and saffron. Yet Robert's breaths came in ragged intervals, and his calls, muffled by spasms, echoed until dawn. Crucially, this was no natural affliction. Contemporary court records note that Robert's dishes were served first to the king himself, who declined them, proclaiming himself not hungry for cherries tonight. Edward's refusal spared his life but intensified scrutiny on Robert's sudden collapse. Master Hugh examined the tart shells and found fine white powder, the burnished remains of hemlock seeds. He confronted Lady Eleanor, who feigned ignorance but fled the castle that very night. In medieval law, proof of poisoning demanded both corpus delicti, the body of the crime, and mens rea, evidence of intent. Hugh's discovery of powdered hemlock and eyewitness testimony of Eleanor's late-night conference with de Monmouth provided both. Eleanor was arrested, tried, and condemned. She confessed under torture that de Monmouth paid her 100 marks for the deed. Robert, though alive, lingered in pain for 5 more days, his screams alternating with lucid commands to secure his estates and settle debts. Robert's survival, uncharacteristic in hemlock cases, owed much to his own physician's quick thinking. By day 3, Hugh had performed a gastric lavage, inserting a tube into Robert's throat to wash out residual poison, a crude precursor to modern stomach pumping. He then administered doses of powdered charcoal, hoping to bind remaining toxins. Robert's eventual recovery was hailed as miraculous. His gratitude cemented Hugh's reputation, and the physician's case notes circulated in Salerno and Montpellier as a landmark success in intentional poison treatment. This episode underscores the intersection of medicine and jurisprudence in the medieval world. The Chester case led Parliament to reaffirm that suspected poisoners could be held without royal pardon until a verdict, reversing Edward I's previous leniency toward noble offenders. It also spurred alchemists to refine poisons that resisted charcoal binding, a dark mirror of medical progress. Yet the political fallout was equally seismic. De Monmouth fled to Wales, dissolving Robert's fragile alliance with Llewellyn and contributing to the tensions that erupted into the Welsh Wars of 1294. Meanwhile, Eleanor of England became a symbol of courtly intrigue, Chroniclers depicted her portrait in minatory verse, warning noble families of the perils lurking behind velvet masks. In the summer of 1304, the sun scorched Toledo's cobblestones as King Alfonso XI of Castile embarked on a military campaign against rebellious southern vassals. Yet within days of occupying Córdoba, Alfonso fell gravely ill, not from battle wounds but from ulcerative dysentery. Chroniclers from the Toledo Chronicle describe a condition so brutal that Alfonso's court physician, Diego of Alcala, likened it to the torments of hell. For 10 nights, the king lay racked with crippling pains, endless bouts of diarrhea, and searing fever, each spasm racking a new moan of despair. Ulcerative dysentery, caused by Shigella dysenteria bacteria, thrives in unsanitary camps and siege conditions. Soldiers and camp followers shared the same water supply. Latrines overflowed into wells. In Alfonso's case, his retinue refused to drink from the local Guadalquivir water. Yet one garrison servant replaced the royal cup's guard with tainted supplies, hoping to weaken the king's command. Whether intentional sabotage or mere negligence, the result was the same: bacterial invasion of the intestines, leading to hemorrhaging, severe dehydration, and excruciating cramps. Diego of Alcala employed every known remedy: bleeding to reduce excess heat, fumigations with frankincense, and pounded seeds of pomegranate and black walnut to halt bloody stools. He wrapped the king in woolen cloths soaked in rosewater to ease fever and performed clister infusions of marshmallow root to soothe inflamed bowels. Each measure provided temporary respite, only to be followed by a relapse more violent than the last. The king's screams, described in the Toledo Chronicle as anguished calls to the Virgin Mary, resonated through Córdoba's Alcazar, prompting the archbishop to decree 3 days of fasting and prayer in Seville Cathedral. Pilgrims arrived, hoping to witness a miracle, but Alfonso's condition only worsened. On the 8th day, his right hand cramped so severely he could not sign decrees. By day 10, gangrenous sores appeared on his buttocks, a grim sign that infection had spread beyond the gut. Political opportunists seized on Alfonso's suffering. The powerful noble Álvaro Náñez de Lara claimed that the king's illness was divine punishment for the merciless treatment of rebellious Castilians. He circulated pamphlets alleging that Diego of Alcala had conspired with Moorish apothecaries, mixing poison into royal ointments. These rumors spread faster than any physician's reassurance, prompting an official inquiry. Diego was arrested, his medical texts seized, and interrogated under threat of torture. Yet when a relieving letter from Pope Clement V declared Diego's methods orthodox, the physician was released, but only after renouncing his position and retreating to a monastery in Salamanca. Alfonso himself, weak but lucid, confronted Náñez at his bedside, accusing him of seditious slander. He drafted new laws requiring royal privy water to be tested by independent apothecaries before reaching the king's table, a direct legacy of his ordeal. These water ordinances spread to Leon and Aragon, marking an early standard for royal food and drink security. By the time Alfonso died on day 12, his death prolonged by successive clysters and poultices, his kingdom was aflame with debate over medical authority and political loyalty. His final cry, "Have mercy, Lord," was both a prayer for relief and a lament for a fractured realm. Diego of Alcala survived him by 2 years, documenting his case in a treatise that influenced Castilian medical schools for centuries. The king's slow death narrative, detailed in illuminated manuscripts, served as a cautionary tale. It emphasized that even natural diseases could be politicized, that medicine could be weaponized through rumor, and that royal vulnerability demanded institutional reforms. The medieval sovereign's agony, whether from slow poison or despotic disease, left indelible marks on medicine, law, and collective memory. The cases of King Edmund of Wessex, Richard of Sicily, Earl Robert of Chester, and King Alfonso of Castile reveal a tapestry of suffering that advanced forensic inquiry, courtly safeguards, and public health ordinances. But beyond these practical outcomes, the cultural legacy of the king who died screaming for a week resonates in literature, art, and our modern understanding of justice. Medical evolution took shape in universities and guilds that systematized symptom analysis. By the mid-15th century, texts like Divininus referenced trial by observation. noting latency periods, tracking hemorrhagic patterns, and correlating environmental factors. The concept of drug specificity, that certain toxins targeted organs in reproducible ways, arose from dissecting cases like Edmund S. and Richard S. Paracelsian iatrochemistry in the 16th century, with its emphasis on dose-response relationships, built directly upon these medieval observations. Legal reforms also trace back to these cases. The Chester poisoning sparked statutes allowing extended detention of suspected poisoners regardless of rank, eroding noble immunity. Alfonso's water ordinances anticipated modern food safety laws, requiring independent testing, codifying chain of custody for royal provisions, and punishing adulteration. By the early Renaissance, European courts insisted on coroners' inquests for any suspicious death and institutional legacy of the king's protracted demise. Political practices evolved in parallel. Royal households formalized the office of cupbearer into a security post, complete with oaths, seals, and rotating guard shifts. Chroniclers in London Avignon and Prague record that these rituals deterred would-be assassins and reinforced the notion that even monarchs were subject to laws both human and divine. In England, the king's men of Edward III ensured his water supply. In France, the Grand Econson of Charles V oversaw all beverages. These roles survived into the 18th century in ceremonial form, vestiges of medieval caution. Cultural reflections preserve these narratives in ballads, plays, and devotional art. Geoffrey Chaucer's unfinished Squire's Tale alludes to a king tortured by unknown poison, reflecting public fascination with courtly intrigue. Illuminated psalters depicted dying monarchs clasping prayer beads, a fusion of piety and fear that underscored mortality's universality. Shakespeare later dramatized poisonings in Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet, echoing the woes of medieval kings in Elsinore's corridors. Even today, these stories shape our sensibilities. True crime documentaries reenact slow poison cases, forensic pathologists study historical autopsies, and toxicologists reference medieval manuals when tracing the origins of chemical warfare. The enduring question, what toxin and who delivered it, still grips audiences. Our understanding of food safety, patient consent, and forensic protocol all spring from the agony of rulers who for 7 nights straight screamed against a fate they could neither postpone nor deny. In closing, the medieval king's Week of Screams teaches us that power cannot shield against nature's or mankind's deadliest weapons. It reminds us that medicine and justice are inseparable. Every remedy carries risk, every accusation requires evidence. And it affirms that, in both suffering and science, the keen observation of pain can be as illuminating as any triumphant battle.